Mickey Edwards is a former Republican congressman from Oklahoma. He's one of more than 100 Republicans who has threatened to form a third party if the Republican Party does not make certain changes. Sam Seder is the host of the Majority Report, an online political talk show, and they join me now. Mickey, let me start with you about the meaning of today and whether you agree or not with my basic read on this about what has to be threatened credibly for anything to change.
Sure, Chris. I mean, what's happened is that for a long time, the problem here was Donald Trump. And it appeared that the difficulty for the country and, of course, for the Republican Party was one person who was out of control. And if you could just get him out of office, then things would come back to normal. And I think there have been several things since the election and since the insurrection and today that have made it clear that this is not just a Donald Trump thing. It's a group of people in Congress. It's the Republican Party leadership from the RNC down and the members of Congress and a lot of governors who have basically given up on the idea that it is their role to protect democracy, to protect the Constitution, to ensure fair elections and freedom of the press and rule of law and all of the things that make America great. And so now a lot of us have decided that what has to happen, we either have to see whether we can bring the party back to its senses or leave it. And not just leave it, not just go off in the wilderness, but actually create an opposition that can target people. So you were mentioning about the large numbers of Republican voters who happen to be, loyalists to Trump, and they're out there in their large numbers, but they're not all in one place. So it may be 70% who agree with him, but it may be 90% in some rural areas and 45% in some urban areas. And so a third party or an active group of people who within the party, who are willing to challenge at the state legislative level, at the congressional level, and put a fight. I mean, that's what we have to do.
Sam, there's always this question about, what's the cause and what's the effect here? And today I feel like it's pretty definitive. I mean, that what the party is and what its voters or most sort of fervent supporters want it to be is being reflected accurately by leadership, right? I mean, they're not doing the wrong thing by their voters with this vote today.
Right. And I would, and I appreciate the idea that there are some Republicans who are willing to at least entertain the notion of being basically a spoiler in elections to come. But I think what's really important is that the framing of the idea of Republicans coming to their senses, I think, is just we are really honestly 5 or 6 years beyond that, even being able to frame it that way. I mean, the idea that Donald Trump dropped out of the sky and suddenly became the nominee of the Republican Party and won the presidential election just by fiat or something is just absurd. The Republican Party has been heading this way for 20 years, maybe more. And so this is not a question of coming back to their senses. This is a one-way ticket for the Republican Party. And for those people who are claiming that they have the power to be spoilers, they either exercise it or they don't. There is no bringing the Republican Party back to their senses. There is no leveraging this.
Yeah, it does seem to me a which side are you on moment. I mean, or it has been. I mean, I think 2016 was, and then 2020 certainly amidst of a pandemic that killed 500, 600,000 people in America and counting. But there's always this, what you see, what's so crushing and enraging at the same time is the denial, like the desire for it not to be a problem, which is a very profound human impulse, but really dangerous. And here's Bill Cassidy, Brian Kilmeade, if he's the nominee, would you vote for him? He's not going to be our nominee. And it's like, we've been playing this game for 5 or 6 years, and that's brought us to the point of a mob storming the Capitol and trying to gouge a cop's eyes out.
Yeah, well, first of all, I just want to say that, let's not try to make this that every time you disagree with the Republican policy, that means that this is all one straight line, because that's nonsense. But you started out, Chris, by making the point about the fight for the soul of the party. I'm not sure the party has a soul anymore. The leadership in the party seems willing to do anything at all just to hold on to power. And a lot of it is cowardice. And some of it is driven from, it's not all from the grassroots. A lot of it is listening to the Kevin McCarthy's and others in Washington who are feeding this, who are fueling it. And so it's working from both directions. And sure, we're willing to look at a third party because I think it may be right that trying to do it from within the party just won't work, because I see very little indication that people who are in high positions in the party today really have that soul that you were talking about. How can I keep my office? How can I avoid getting defeated? Because I like people calling me Mr. Congressman. I like people saying, yes, Congressman, what can we do for you? And they don't want to lose that job. And there's a lot of cowardice. Not everybody, in the Republican part of the legislature, the Congress, loves Donald Trump, but they're sure afraid of losing their job, and they'll do whatever it takes to keep it.
Although one of the things, Sam, that I learned in the Bush administration, and I think it's interesting that we have these Bush references today, Liz Cheney and the Bring It On, is that there's no democratic check for some of the most awful things that can be advocated. I mean, when the Republican Party and Bush went along with essentially a global torture regime, it's not like the bottom dropped out for them electorally. Like, people were like, there's a lot you can violate that should be sacrosanct without it punishing you politically. And people keep waiting for the political punishment. It's not going to come in any definitive sense.
Look, there is none of it. It's not coming at all. I mean, the bottom line is there is an opportunity for maybe 100 former Republicans or would-be former Republicans to play a spoiler role. But all of this, the battle of the soul of the party, that is over. That all of this has been resolved. I mean, John Dean wrote a book about authoritarianism in the Republican Party, and he did that during the Bush years. We are so far past any type of moment of threats or anything to that effect. It is all sewn up. And the bottom line is, to the extent that Cheney or anyone else has the ability to be a spoiler, that is their only value. And, and so I think you don't have to venerate Cheney, but I'll tell you, if they set up a third party to run against Republican Congress people in swing districts, I will support that endeavor. And that's about it.
Mickey Edwards.
We will sign you up for that. But I wrote, by the way, even before John Dean's book, I said the same thing that you just said in a book in 2008. So
it's a long time coming.
Party for a while.
Mickey Edwards and Sam Seder, whose microphone just sounds incredible. Nice work there, Sam. Thank you both.
I appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.